Okay, so if you guys did what I asked after the second part, you went out and ran as hard as you could for as long as you could, and then you came back. And right now, you should be breathing heavy. Depending upon your body, and we're all going to be different with this, but depending upon your body, your genetics, your age, your gender, your training, etc., the environment, all these factors, you may or may not have shifted away from aerobic respiration. So when we hit a point of not enough oxygen, whether it's strangulation, smokers, carbon monoxide blocks the oxygen, or if you have a bad furnace in the fall and winter and you're producing carbon monoxide, that actually blocks oxygen from getting to your cells. Or you guys went out and ran, like I said, run. How far did you make it? Did you make it a block? Did you make it 2 blocks? Some of you, maybe you made it 2-3 miles before your body shifted. So the key is when we don't have enough oxygen to maintain aerobic respiration, then our body will shift into anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic means not enough oxygen, without oxygen. All right, so this pathway works. Cellular respiration does not require oxygen. It just has to have glucose in the mitochondria. But anaerobic is not nearly as efficient. It's a very, very terrible pathway when we talk about ATP production. So let me back up though. It's not terrible. It's just a limiting pathway. It doesn't give us a lot of ATP produced because of how the pathway works. All right, so our bodies cannot survive. We can go maybe 2 to 3 minutes in anaerobic respiration before the cells begin to die. Okay, so here's the pathway of anaerobic. So lack of oxygen equals anaerobic respiration. This is also known as, in other organisms, fermentation. All right, so if we're trying to make beer or wine or bread or things like that, fermentation's awesome. In our body, not a good thing. So what will happen here when we look at anaerobic respiration? We start out with that glucose molecule. There it is. We break it down. We go through glycolysis. That's this step here, turning the glucose into the pyruvates. So remember, we gained 2 ATP. We actually got 4, but we had to spend 2. So you had 2 ATP going in. You got 4 back. So technically your net gain, your profit, is going to be 2. And then we made 2 of the wheelbarrows that we've been talking about. 2 of those things that will carry NADHs for us. Okay? So now we're at the pyruvate level. So 2 pyruvates. If oxygen is not there, we cannot go to the pyruvate conversion. So instead of going to the pyruvate conversion and moving into the mitochondria and doing all of those steps, without oxygen, our muscle tissue goes and produces a stuff called lactate. So for us, this happens in the muscle tissue. Oh, that's supposed to be a C. Muscle. Sorry. All right. So we will begin to produce a stuff called lactate. Lactate is what causes fatigue and cramping and your muscles to get sore during exercise. So as you build up lactate, it throws back feedback inhibition to your body to say, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep trying to maintain this level of output because there's not enough oxygen. It's an oxygen issue. So if you're running, you're breathing harder and harder and harder, your body is moving into the anaerobic threshold point to say, okay, this is when we tip over and now you're into anaerobic and we're going to shut your system down because you can't maintain that level of ATP production any longer. In yeast cells and other single-celled organisms, they don't make lactate. Instead, they make alcohol. All right, so making beer, making wine. You guys walk down into a bakery and, ooh, I can smell that bread. You walk into a pizza place and you can smell the dough rising. That's all fermentation. So what you're smelling is the CO2 gas being given off by the yeast, by the organisms during fermentation or anaerobic conditions. So when we're making wine, we intentionally put the yeast into an anaerobic environment to convert the glucose into alcohol. It also gives off carbon dioxide. That's an end product of fermentation here. And that alcohol or that CO2 has to be vented and eliminated. Otherwise, if you're making wine, it builds up, and pop. It can explode your wine-making operation. Okay, but think about ourselves. If anybody's ever been in cross-country, everybody has a threshold. We call the anaerobic threshold is the point when you switch, when your body goes from, that should be typo, sorry, goes from aerobic to anaerobic. So you look at this group of runners, cross-country runners all starting out, and let's say the guy in the front here, number 86, is running a 4.5 minute mile. All right. Awesome pace, unbelievable. Can he sustain that, or will he crash and go to anaerobic? Maybe one of the guys in the back here is running a 4.8 minute mile. Well, if he doesn't crash, he's going to beat number 86. Even though 86 is running faster, if he hits that threshold and crashes, slower runners will beat him. So our threshold. What determines our threshold? Well, to start with, our age. Generally, when we're younger, we have a better anaerobic threshold. Our gender. In general, men have a better threshold than women. There are plenty of exceptions to the rules. I know a woman, she's was qualifying for Olympics in the marathon. Unbelievable threshold, unbelievable running potential. What's your genetics? Genetics plays a huge role. Do you have the natural genetics for this? What about your environment? Think about why so many endurance athletes live in Colorado, in the mountains. They're training in these high elevations to improve their threshold. Now we have those VO masks that you can put on your face and wear during exercise that mimic those environmental conditions. If you train in an environment that has a low oxygen content, high elevations, then your body has to produce more red blood cells. You produce more red blood cells when you get into a normal environment, lower elevation environment. There's more oxygen available. You actually can grab and carry more oxygen and improve and maintain a higher aerobic threshold. This is why you train in Colorado and then you race at sea level. You have an unbelievable difference in aerobic thresholds. People do it, unfortunately, by cheating. That's the issue of blood doping in a lot of endurance sports. And then, what is your basic training? Are you putting the time, the energy, the effort into this? Every one of us will be able to improve our threshold by simple exercise. Go out and walk, and then walk faster, and then keep walking faster. Each day you do this, your threshold will improve. So think about everybody who's played a sport. The beginning of the season is conditioning. Conditioning is your coach's way of trying to improve your threshold. Because during the middle of a game, if you go into anaerobic, you're down, you're cramped up, you're fatigued. You're not helping the team much if you're laying on the ground there because you're cramped up so bad when you went into your anaerobic threshold. Can you recover? Sure, but it takes time, and there may not be enough time for you to get back on the field and keep playing. So that is the drive behind why coaches push conditioning. Even with baseball, softball, sports that you don't do a lot of running in. They're going, okay, go out and run 3 miles. In a game, you never run more than 90 feet at a time usually. 90 feet, maybe if you get a double, a triple, whatever. But the coach wants your conditioning as good as possible and trying to get you to a higher level of aerobic respiration before you shift to anaerobic. Okay, so again, key here. Glucose goes in, breaks down, keeps breaking down to ultimately get those electrons to the electron transport chain to make a massive amount of ATP. 2 to 3 minutes without it, and our cells begin to die. I can't stress that enough. 2 to 3 minutes. So if somebody has a heart attack and oxygen doesn't get to parts of the heart, 2 to 3 minutes, those cells begin to die because they don't have the energy they need to function. A stroke, 2 to 3 minutes, brain tissue begins to die. Timing and speed of recovery is so critical with those issues. How quickly can you get that clot removed from the stroke to restore blood flow? The faster, the less damage, the less cell death that has occurred. All right, so glucose is the preferred source, but we can use other sources. We can use fats and we can use proteins to make energy. These are the alternative energy sources. Okay, so the thing with fats, we'd rather use fats for other things, other purposes, other functions, cell membranes. But if you have fat, and the fat breaks apart into its individual components of glycerol and fatty acids, both of those enter into the respiration pathway. Glycerol enters up here and then goes through the pyruvate conversion to acetyl-CoA to citric acid or Krebs, and then eventually becomes ATP. Fatty acids enter the pathway at the acetyl-CoA level and then into citric acid and become ATP. So they enter at different stages or different levels, but they can generate large amounts of ATP per gram of fat. Proteins. Now, proteins can be turned into energy, but there are so many other important functions of proteins that we do not want to use it for an energy source. Under normal conditions, if your body is breaking down protein, usually it's an indication you're in a starvation mode and you're actually breaking down your own muscle tissue to supply energy. That's not healthy at all. If you're consuming massive amounts of protein and ignoring carbs and fats, it's not the greatest thing for your body. And your body can take the protein, bust it down into the amino acids. Those move into the acetyl-CoA and the citric acid cycle. But the problem here is this ammonium. So ammonium is part of the protein structure, and it goes through deamination, becomes ammonium. That's what you're breathing out. That's what gives you that bad protein breath when you're using proteins for energy. That's, ooh, I can tell somebody's on the Atkins diet or one of those high protein diets by the the ammonium being exhaled during the breathing. The problem is when it goes through the kidneys, it tends to stress the kidneys. If it's a long-term thing, not the healthiest of ways to treat your body by using proteins as a source of energy. All right, so the key here is determine where's your threshold at and try to improve your threshold. Little stuff. Just go out for a walk. 10-minute walk. You're like, I don't have time. 10-minute walk. Next time, 10 minutes, but walk a little faster. Push yourself. Push that envelope, improve your threshold, and it improves your metabolic rate, which means you can eat more without worrying about gaining weight. All right? So use the pathway to understand your own health.